the reason the dog kept barking in front of the coffin. Miracle no one could have imagined happened. Part 1. The Woman Who Loved Quietly. Maya Richardson had always been the kind of woman who moved through life with grace nobody noticed until she was gone. At 43 years old, she worked as a custodian at the Pinewood Police Department in rural Georgia, arriving before dawn and leaving long after the officers had clocked out. Her hands were calloused from years of scrubbing floors and polishing badges that would never belong to her, but she never complained. Not once. She lived in a modest rental house on the edge of town, the kind with peeling paint and a porch that creaked when the wind blew too hard. Every morning she'd wake at 4:30, brew a single cup of coffee, and whisper a prayer before heading out into the darkness. Her daughter, Amani, was away at community college, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Maya sent her whatever she could spare, even if it meant eating rice and beans for a week straight. At the precinct, Maya was invisible in the way that good people often are. Officers passed her in the hallways without a second glance. Some nodded politely. Others didn't bother. But Maya didn't mind. She found her purpose in the small things, making sure the floors gleamed, the windows sparkled, and the coffee was always fresh in the break room. She took pride in her work, even if nobody else noticed. There was one soul at the precinct who saw her, though. Rex, the German shepherd. He was the canine partner of Officer Daniel Granger, a decorated cop who treated Maya with the kind of respect that made her heart warm. Daniel always greeted her by name, asked about Amani, and made sure to thank her before leaving each night. And Rex, well, Rex had a habit of sitting beside Maya's cleaning cart whenever she worked near the canine unit, his tail thumping softly against the tile. "You've got a friend there," Daniel would say with a smile, scratching Rex behind the ears. "He's a good judge of character." Maya would laugh softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's a sweet boy, you both are." But beneath the surface of her quiet life, Maya carried a weight she never spoke about. Bills piled up faster than her paychecks could cover them. Her landlord, a man named Gerald Cummings, had been raising her rent every few months, testing how far he could push before she broke. And at the precinct, the new deputy chief, a man named Marcus Langford, had started making changes that felt personal. He'd cut her hours, reassigned her to the graveyard shift, and made snide comments about keeping standards high. Maya endured it all with dignity. She had to. Amani was counting on her. One October morning, as golden leaves drifted across the precinct parking lot, Maya arrived to find a notice taped to her locker. Her heart sank as she read the words, "Budget cuts effective immediately. Part-time staff will be reduced to 3 days per week." 3 days. That was barely enough to cover groceries, let alone rent. She folded the notice carefully and placed it in her bag, her hands trembling just slightly. Then she took a deep breath, tied her hair back, and started her shift. There was work to be done, and Maya Richardson had never been one to quit. But as she pushed her cart down the empty hallway, she didn't notice Marcus Langford watching from his office window, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had plans for the precinct, and people like Maya, people who didn't fight back, were easy to erase. What neither of them knew was that in just a few short weeks, everything would change. A funeral would bring them all together, and a dog's desperate barking would reveal a truth so powerful, it would shake the very foundation of everything they thought they knew. Part 2. The First Crack. The changes came slowly at first, like water eroding stone. Maya noticed them in the way Marcus Langford looked through her instead of at her, in the way her cleaning supplies started disappearing from the storage room, in the whispers that stopped the moment she entered a space. It was a Thursday morning when things took a darker turn. Maya had just finished mopping the main hallway when Langford appeared, his polished shoes clicking against the wet floor. He didn't acknowledge her work or step carefully around it. Instead, he walked straight through, leaving muddy footprints across the gleaming tile. "You missed a spot," he said without looking back. Maya's jaw tightened, but she simply nodded. "Yes, sir, I'll get right on it." As she remopped the floor, Officer Daniel Granger walked by with Rex at his side. He paused, taking in the scene, his expression darkening. "That was deliberate," he said quietly, helping Maya wring out her mop. "You know that, right?" Maya offered a tired smile. "It's just part of the job, Officer Granger." "Daniel, please call me Daniel." He crouched down, meeting her eyes. "And it's not just part of the job. What he's doing to you, it's not right." Before Maya could respond, Rex nudged her hand with his nose, his dark eyes full of warmth. She scratched behind his ears, finding comfort in the simple gesture. "I've worked hard places before," Maya said softly. "I can handle it." But Daniel shook his head. "You shouldn't have to." That conversation stayed with Maya throughout the week. She'd never had someone in authority stand up for her before, not really. Most people just let injustice slide by, too comfortable in their own lives to risk rocking the boat. The following Monday, Maya's hours were cut again. Now she was down to 2 days a week. When she tried to speak with Langford about it, his secretary told her he was too busy to meet with staff at her level. The message was clear. She didn't matter. Maya sat in her car after that meeting, staring at the paycheck stub that would barely cover half her rent. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She'd call Imani that night and tell her everything was fine. She'd figure something out. She always did. But the universe had other plans. That evening, as Maya was finishing her shortened shift, she heard commotion near the canine unit. Officers were rushing toward the parking lot, radios crackling with urgent codes she didn't understand. She stepped outside and saw the flashing lights of ambulances and patrol cars. "What happened?" she asked a young officer passing by. His face was pale. "It's Officer Granger. There was an accident during a call. They're transporting him now." Maya's heart dropped. "Is he going to be okay?" The officer didn't answer. He just shook his head and kept moving. Rex was there too, being led back inside by another handler. But the dog kept turning back, whining, his ears pinned flat against his head. When he saw Maya, he pulled toward her, and the handler let him go. Rex pressed against her legs, trembling, and Maya knelt down, wrapping her arms around him. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if anything would ever be okay again. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. 3 days later, Officer Daniel Granger was pronounced dead at Pinewood Regional Hospital. The official report said he'd succumbed to injuries sustained during a vehicle pursuit. The entire precinct went into mourning. And Maya, who'd only ever been invisible, found herself grieving for one of the only people who'd ever truly seen her. The funeral was scheduled for the following Saturday. Maya wasn't sure if she should attend. After all, she was just the custodian. But something in her heart told her she needed to be there, for Daniel and for Rex. What she didn't know was that this funeral would change everything. That Rex's barking would unlock a secret no one could have imagined. And that Maya Richardson, the humble woman who cleaned floors and asked for nothing, would become the witness to a miracle that would echo far beyond the walls of that small-town chapel. Part 3. The Day Everything Changed. The morning of the funeral arrived wrapped in gray October clouds. Maya stood in front of her closet, running her fingers over the few dresses she owned. She settled on a simple black dress she'd worn to her own mother's funeral years ago, pressed and proper. As she fastened a small silver cross around her neck, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes looked older somehow, weighted with a sadness that went deeper than just losing Daniel. The church was already packed when Maya arrived. She slipped into a back pew, not wanting to draw attention. Officers filled the front rows in their dress uniforms, a sea of navy blue and polished brass. Daniel's widow, Amanda, sat in the front, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The casket at the altar was draped with an American flag, and beside it, wearing his black vest with police stitched across it, sat Rex. Maya's breath caught. The dog looked lost, his ears drooping, his usual alert posture replaced with something that looked like confusion. Every few moments, he'd glance around as if searching for Daniel, expecting his partner to walk through the door at any moment. The service began with hymns and prayers. The police chaplain spoke of Daniel's service, his dedication, his love for his community and his family. Colleagues shared stories that brought both tears and soft laughter. Through it all, Rex remained still, except for the occasional low whine that made everyone's hearts ache a little more. Maya wiped her eyes, remembering Daniel's kindness, how he'd always treated her like she mattered, how he'd noticed when she was struggling and offered help without making her feel small. The world had lost a good man, and she'd lost one of the few allies she'd ever had. Then something shifted. Rex stood suddenly, his body rigid. His ears pricked forward and he let out a soft bark. At first, people glanced over but assumed it was grief, the confusion of a loyal dog who couldn't understand why his partner was in a box instead of by his side. But Rex barked again, louder this time, and again. Maya sat forward, her heart beginning to race. She'd spent enough time around Rex to know his different sounds. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't sorrow. This was his alert bark, the one he used when something was wrong, when he'd found something during a search. The officer sitting beside Rex tried to calm him, placing a gentle hand on his back. "Easy, boy, easy." But Rex wouldn't be calmed. He began packing around the casket, his barks growing more frantic, more desperate. His paws scraped against the polished wood, and he pressed his nose to the base of the coffin, sniffing intently. Whispers rippled through the congregation. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged confused glances. Amanda looked up, her face stricken with fresh pain, as if Rex's grief was reopening her own wound. But Maya saw something different. She'd watched Rex work dozens of times when Daniel brought him through the precinct. She'd seen him search lockers during drills, find hidden contraband, alert to dangers nobody else could detect. And what she was seeing now looked exactly like that. Rex wasn't mourning. He was working. An older officer, someone Maya recognized as Bryant, stood up from his pew and walked toward the casket. He knelt beside Rex, speaking softly, trying to understand. But Rex only barked harder, more insistently, circling back to the same spot over and over again. That's when Maya heard it. It was faint, so faint she almost thought she'd imagined it. A tiny sound, barely audible beneath Rex's barking. A muffled cry, high-pitched and weak, coming from inside the casket. Her blood ran cold. She stood up without thinking, her voice breaking through the murmurs. "Wait, listen." Heads turned toward her, surprised to hear the quiet custodian speak up. But Brian had heard it too. His face went pale as he pressed his ear closer to the casket. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Open it," Maya said, her voice stronger now, carrying across the chapel. "You need to open it right now." The funeral director stammered something about protocol and respect, but Bryant was already moving, his hands fumbling with the latches. Rex backed up slightly, his tail stiff, his eyes locked on the coffin as if to say, "Finally, finally someone's listening." The room held its breath. Amanda stood, her hand pressed to her mouth. Officers moved closer, forming a protective circle. And Maya, still standing in the back pew, felt her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The lid creaked open. And there, nestled against Daniel's chest beneath his folded hands, hidden in the folds of his dress uniform, was a tiny, squirming puppy. No more than a few days old, its eyes still closed, its fur damp and matted. Alive! The chapel erupted in gasps and cries. Someone screamed. Someone else started praying. But Maya just stood there, tears streaming down her face, watching as Rex pressed forward, his tail finally wagging, gently sniffing the tiny creature he'd risked everything to save. A miracle. Against every odd, against every law of nature, a newborn puppy had survived inside a sealed casket, and a loyal dog had refused to let anyone forget it was there. This wasn't just a funeral anymore. This was something else entirely. something sacred, something that would change every single person in that room, including Maya Richardson, who was about to discover that sometimes the quietest voices witness the loudest truths. Part 4. The letter that explained everything. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The puppy squirmed weakly against Daniel's chest, its tiny paws pushing against the fabric of his uniform. The sound it made was barely more than a squeak, but in the profound silence of the chapel, it echoed like thunder. Officer Bryant's hands shook as he carefully reached into the casket, his fingers gentle as he scooped up the fragile creature. The puppy fit entirely in his palm, so small and vulnerable that several people gasped at the sight. Rex immediately pressed closer, his nose twitching as he sniffed the newborn, his tail wagging with cautious relief. "How is this possible?" Amanda whispered, her voice cracking. She'd moved closer, one hand pressed to her heart. How could? That's when Bryant noticed something else. A piece of paper, folded carefully and tucked beneath the edge of Daniel's jacket. With trembling fingers, he pulled it free. Written on the outside in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting was a single sentence. "If anything happens to me, please take care of them." "Them," Bryant read aloud, his voice breaking. Maya had moved forward without realizing it, drawn by something she couldn't name. She stood at the edge of the crowd now, close enough to see the note, to see the puppy's tiny chest rising and falling with desperate breaths. Close enough to see Rex's dark eyes, full of purpose and understanding that went far beyond animal instinct. Bryant unfolded the letter, and the chapel fell silent once more as he began to read. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home." Amanda's sob cut through the air. Officers removed their hats, pressing them to their chests. Bryant continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But if Rex is still with you, and if by some miracle she made it too, then please know this wasn't an accident. I knew she was coming." Confusion rippled through the crowd. Maya's brow furrowed as she tried to understand. "I kept it a secret because I didn't want anyone to panic or try to stop me. Rex and I, well, we've seen things most can't understand, but we always understood each other. She was born the night I went missing in the cold, alone. Rex didn't leave my side, not even when he had the chance to run. He stayed. He guarded. And when I closed my eyes for the last time, I only hoped someone would hear him bark." The pieces began falling into place. Maya remembered the night Daniel went missing, 3 days before they found him. The entire precinct had been searching, calling his name through the dark woods where his patrol car had been discovered overturned in a ditch. They'd found him the next morning, hypothermic and barely conscious, with Rex curled around him. The doctors said it was a miracle he'd survived the freezing temperatures at all. But what they hadn't known, what Daniel had hidden from everyone, was that Rex's missing canine partner, Luna, had been with them too. She'd been pregnant, due any day. And in those cold, desperate hours while Daniel lay injured and fatting, she'd given birth. "He protected her," Bryant whispered, looking down at the puppy. "Even dying, he protected her." Rex let out a soft whine, pressing his nose against the tiny creature in Bryant's palm. The connection was undeniable now. This wasn't just any puppy. This was Luna's daughter. This was the life Daniel had given everything to preserve. Amanda sank into the front pew, her face buried in her hands. Officers wiped their eyes openly now, no longer trying to hide their tears. The chaplain stood with his hand over his mouth, unable to speak. But Maya, standing at the edge of the miracle, felt something shift inside her chest. For so long, she'd felt invisible, insignificant, like her life was just a series of small tasks nobody noticed. But watching Rex, seeing the way he'd fought to save this tiny life, the way Daniel had planned for it even in his final moments, she understood something profound. Every life matters. Every act of protection, every moment of loyalty, every sacrifice made in love, it all matters, even when nobody's watching, even when the world tells you you're not important. Daniel had known that. Rex knew that. and somehow, without meaning to, Maya had become a witness to proof of it. A voice broke through her thoughts. It was Marcus Langford standing near the back of the chapel. His face was unreadable, but his voice carried a strange edge. "This is highly irregular. We need to follow proper procedure. Animal control should be contacted and—" "No," Amanda's voice rang out, sharp and clear. She stood, turning to face Langford with a strength that silenced him immediately. "My husband gave his life protecting her. Rex risked everything to save her. She's coming home with us, and that's final." The chapel erupted in applause. Officers stood, nodding their agreement. Even people who'd never met Daniel clapped, moved by a story that transcended procedure and protocol. Maya found herself clapping too, tears streaming freely down her face. And when she caught Rex's eye across the crowd, she could have sworn the dog looked right at her, as if to say, "You understand now, don't you?" She did, more than ever before. But the miracle wasn't finished yet. The true test of what this moment meant was still to come, and Maya Richardson, the woman who'd spent her life being overlooked, was about to play a part nobody could have predicted. Part 5. The woman who refused to be silent. The precinct felt different in the days following the funeral. There was a reverence in the hallways, a quiet respect that seemed to settle over everything like morning dew. Officers spoke in softer tones. Even the harsh fluorescent lights seemed gentler somehow. Maya had expected to return to her normal routine, the invisible custodian who kept the floors clean and the coffee fresh. But something had changed, not just in the precinct, but in her. Standing in that chapel, witnessing Rex's desperate devotion and Daniel's final act of protection, had awakened something she'd kept buried for far too long. A voice, her voice. The puppy, now named Hope by unanimous agreement, was thriving under Amanda and Rex's care. Updates were shared throughout the department, photos passed around like treasured artifacts. Officers who'd once walked past Maya without a glance now stopped to talk about the miracle, asking if she'd been there, wanting to hear her perspective. "You were the first one to say something, weren't you?" Officer Bryant asked her one morning as she cleaned the break room. "You told us to listen." Maya paused, her rag still in her hand. "Rex was telling us. I just helped people hear him." Bryant smiled, a warmth in his expression that Maya wasn't used to receiving. "Takes courage to speak up like that, especially in a room full of people who weren't listening." Those words stayed with Maya as she worked. Courage. She'd never thought of herself as courageous. Surviving, yes. Enduring, absolutely. But courage, that was for people like Daniel, people who ran toward danger instead of away from it. But maybe courage came in different forms. Maybe standing up when everyone else was sitting down was its own kind of bravery. That afternoon, Maya found a notice in her locker. Another cut. Effective immediately, she was being reduced to 1 day per week. The reason listed was continued budget constraints, but Maya knew better. This was Marcus Langford's doing. He'd been even colder toward her since the funeral, as if her moment of speaking up had been a personal offense. She stared at the notice, her hands trembling. 1 day a week wouldn't even cover her utilities. She'd have to find another job, maybe 2. Imani's tuition payment was due next month. The rent increase Gerald had promised was coming. Everything was falling apart. For a moment, the old Maya wanted to fold the notice away, accept it quietly, and figure out how to survive on even less. That's what she'd always done. Keep her head down. Don't make waves. But then she thought of Rex, barking when everyone else wanted silence. She thought of Daniel, protecting life even in his final moments. She thought of how she'd stood up in that chapel and spoken truth that needed to be heard. Maybe it was time to bark a little herself. Maya walked straight to Marcus Langford's office. His secretary looked up in surprise. "I need to speak with Deputy Chief Langford," Maya said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, ma'am, but this won't take long." The secretary hesitated, then picked up her phone. After a brief conversation, she nodded toward the door. "He'll give you 5 minutes." Marcus Langford sat behind his desk, his expression cold and dismissive. He didn't stand when Maya entered, didn't offer her a seat, just looked at her like she was an interruption he'd tolerate for exactly as long as required. "Mrs. Richardson, what can I do for you?" Maya placed the notice on his desk. "I'd like to understand why my hours keep getting cut when the precinct's budget actually increased this quarter." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Excuse me. I clean this building every day. I see the budget reports that get left on desks, filed in trash cans, forgotten in copy machines. The department received additional funding 2 months ago, yet I'm the only staff member whose hours have been reduced." Langford's jaw tightened. "Budget allocation is complex. I don't expect someone in your position to understand the nuances." "Someone in my position," Maya repeated quietly. "You mean someone who cleans your floors, someone who's worked here for 12 years without a single complaint, someone who showed up every day, even when you cut my hours and my pay and my dignity." "Mrs. Richardson, I think you're overstepping." "No, sir. I think you've been understepping. I think you've been targeting me specifically, and I'd like to know why." The room crackled with tension. Langford stood slowly, his hands flat on his desk. "You have 1 day a week now. If you don't like it, there are plenty of other people who'd be grateful for the work." Maya met his gaze without flinching. "Then I guess you'll need to find one of them, because I'm filing a formal complaint with Human Resources, and I'm requesting a full review of all staffing decisions you've made since taking this position." She turned and walked out before he could respond, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. The secretary stared at her with wide eyes. Maya just nodded politely and kept walking. She'd done it, she'd actually done it. And just like Rex's barking in that chapel, her voice had finally been heard. Now came the hard part, making sure it mattered. What Maya didn't know was that her courage had been noticed by more than just Langford. Officer Bryant had been walking past the office, had heard every word through the thin walls, and he was already making calls, reaching out to others who'd noticed the same patterns, the same targeting, the same injustice that had been quietly poisoning their precinct. The miracle at the funeral had opened more than one casket. It had opened eyes. And Maya Richardson, the woman who'd spent years being invisible, was about to discover she had more allies than she'd ever imagined. Part 6. The Alliance of the Unseen. Word spread through the precinct faster than Maya expected. By the next morning, 3 other staff members had approached her in the break room, speaking in hushed tones about their own experiences with Marcus Langford. A dispatcher named Keisha told Maya she'd been written up twice for unprofessional conduct after refusing his dinner invitation. A records clerk named Thomas mentioned how his request for family leave had been denied despite it being guaranteed by department policy. Even one of the newer officers, a young man named Rodriguez, shared that Langford had blocked his application for canine training without explanation. "He picks people he thinks won't fight back," Keisha said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "People he thinks don't matter." Maya listened, her heart aching with recognition. They were all outsiders in their own way, the black dispatcher, the soft-spoken clerk, the rookie officer with the wrong last name. People Langford thought he could diminish without consequence. "We matter," Maya said quietly. The others looked at her. "We all matter, and it's time someone reminded him of that." Officer Bryant had been true to his word. He'd quietly gathered information, documenting patterns in Langford's decisions over the past 18 months, budget reports that didn't match staffing cuts, employee complaints that had been buried, performance reviews that contradicted actual work records. It was all there, a paper trail of systematic targeting that Langford had assumed nobody would notice or care enough to compile. "I was Daniel's friend," Bryant told Maya when he showed her his findings. "He talked about you sometimes, Said you were one of the hardest workers here, that you deserved better. I think he'd want someone to stand up for you the way you stood up in that chapel." Maya's eyes welled with tears. "I just said what needed to be said." "Exactly, and now we need to say what needs to be said about this." He tapped the folder of documents. "I'm taking this to the chief, but I need you to be willing to go on record. It won't be easy. Langford will fight back." Maya thought about Imani, working 2 jobs to afford community college. She thought about all the nights she'd gone to bed hungry so she could send her daughter grocery money. She thought about the years she'd spent making herself small, invisible, acceptable to people who would never truly see her. And she thought about Rex, barking until someone listened. "I'll do it," she said. The meeting with Chief Anderson was scheduled for Thursday morning. Maya took the day off from her single remaining shift, putting on her best dress and the silver cross that had belonged to her mother. She arrived early, sitting in the waiting area with Bryant, Keisha, Thomas, and Rodriguez. They'd all agreed to speak, to share their experiences, to be witnesses to a truth that had been hidden too long. Marcus Langford arrived 10 minutes late, his expression icy when he saw the group assembled outside the chief's office. "Is this some kind of ambush?" "It's called accountability," Bryant replied evenly. Inside the chief's office, Maya felt her hands shaking as she sat across from Chief Anderson, a silver-haired man in his 60s with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. Langford sat to her right, his posture rigid with barely controlled anger. "Mrs. Richardson," Chief Anderson began gently, "Officer Bryant has shared some concerns with me. I'd like to hear your perspective directly." Maya took a breath. Then she told her story, all of it. The gradual hour cuts that coincided with Langford's arrival, the dismissive treatment, the deliberate disrespect, the way he'd walked through her freshly mopped floors and blamed her for his mess, the notice reducing her to 1 day a week despite increased department funding. When she finished, Langford leaned forward, his voice smooth. "Chief, Mrs. Richardson is a fine employee, but budget constraints require difficult decisions across all departments. This isn't personal, it's practical." "Then explain why no other custodial staff had their hours reduced," Bryant interjected, placing a spreadsheet on the desk. "In fact, 2 white employees received raises during the same period Maya's hours were cut." Langford's face flushed. "This is ridiculous. Are you actually suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Bryant said. "I'm presenting facts." Chief Anderson studied the documents in silence. When he looked up, his expression was grave. "Marcus, I'm going to need you to step out while I speak with Mrs. Richardson and Officer Bryant privately." "Sir, I don't think." "That wasn't a request." Langford left, his footsteps heavy with suppressed rage. Once the door closed, Chief Anderson sighed deeply. "Mrs. Richardson, I owe you an apology. I should have noticed this pattern myself." He looked at the documents again, shaking his head. "I've been chief for 23 years. I've seen a lot of things, but watching someone systematically target good people, that never sits right with me." Maya felt tears threatening but held them back. "I just want to work, sir. I just want to be treated fairly." "You will be, I promise you that." He turned to Bryant. "How many others are willing to go on record?" "4 so far. Probably more once they hear someone's finally listening." Chief Anderson nodded slowly. "Then we'll listen to all of them." What happened next unfolded quickly. Langford was placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Human Resources launched a comprehensive review of all his personnel decisions. Maya's hours were immediately restored, with back pay for what she'd lost. Keisha's write-ups were expunged from her record. Thomas got his family leave approved. Rodriguez was reconsidered for canine training. But the real miracle, the one that mattered most to Maya, came 3 days later. She was cleaning the break room when Rex appeared in the doorway, his tail wagging. Behind him stood Amanda, holding little Hope in her arms. The puppy had grown already, her eyes now open. revealing the same intelligent darkness as her mother's had been. "Maya," Amanda said softly, "I wanted to thank you for speaking up that day, for refusing to let the miracle be ignored." Maya set down her cleaning supplies and approached, gently scratching Hope's tiny head. "I just listened to what Rex was trying to tell us." "No," Amanda said, "you did more than that. You showed everyone that speaking up matters, that standing up for truth matters even when it's hard." Rex pressed against Maya's legs and she knelt down, burying her face in his fur. "Your daddy would be proud of you," she whispered. "So proud." And in that moment, in a break room at a small-town precinct, three souls connected: a widow, a custodian, and a dog who'd refused to let a miracle die in silence. They were all survivors, all fighters, all proof that the quietest voices can change everything when they finally choose to bark. Part 7. The day truth had its reckoning. The investigation into Marcus Langford took 6 weeks. During that time, Maya watched the precinct transform. Officers who'd once rushed past her now stopped to ask how she was doing. Staff members she'd never spoken to before shared their own stories of mistreatment, emboldened by her courage to speak up. Even Chief Anderson made a point to visit the break room, thanking Maya personally for her years of dedicated service. "You should have been recognized a long time ago," he told her. "That's changing now." But Maya knew the real test was still coming. The hearing. Langford had hired a lawyer, was fighting the allegations with every resource at his disposal. He claimed discrimination in reverse, said he was being targeted for making tough but necessary decisions. His attorney painted him as a scapegoat, and Maya as a disgruntled employee with an agenda. The morning of the hearing, Maya stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her dress for the 3rd time. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Imani had driven home from college to be there, and now she stood in the doorway, pride shining in her young eyes. "Mama, you've got this," Imani said. "You've been strong your whole life. Today you just get to let other people see it." Maya pulled her daughter into a hug, drawing strength from her presence. "I'm scared, baby." "I know, but remember what you always told me. Fear doesn't mean you're weak. It means what you're doing matters." They arrived at the municipal building together. The hearing room was smaller than Maya expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lights that hummed softly overhead. Officer Bryant was already there, along with Keisha, Thomas, Rodriguez, and 7 other employees who'd come forward with complaints. Amanda sat in the back row with Rex at her feet and Hope sleeping in a carrier beside her. Marcus Langford entered with his attorney, his face a mask of professional composure. He didn't look at Maya or any of the others, just took his seat and stared straight ahead. The hearing officer, a stern woman named Mrs. Patricia Hallbrook, called the room to order. For the next 3 hours, testimony was given. Bryant presented his documentation. Keisha described the harassment. Thomas explained how his family emergency had been dismissed. One by one, they painted a picture of systematic abuse that Langford's attorney tried desperately to discredit. Then it was Maya's turn. She walked to the front, her legs feeling like water. The room was silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's fingers on her stenography machine. Mrs. Hallbrook nodded encouragingly. "Mrs. Richardson, in your own words, please describe your experience working under Deputy Chief Langford." Maya opened her mouth, but for a moment nothing came out. Fear gripped her throat. This was it, her moment to speak truth. And what if nobody believed her? What if they thought she was just bitter, just another person complaining about life's unfairness? Then she heard a soft sound from the back of the room, a whine, followed by a gentle bark. "Rex." She turned and saw him standing now, his tail wagging slowly, his eyes locked on hers. And beside him, little Hope stirred in her carrier, making the tiny squeaking sounds puppies make. Maya thought about that funeral, about how Rex had refused to be silent when something precious needed protecting, about how Daniel had given everything to preserve a single fragile life, about how speaking up, even when your voice shakes, is sometimes the only thing standing between injustice and truth. She turned back to Mrs. Holbrook, and when she spoke, her voice was clear. I've worked at Pinewood Police Department for 12 years. I've cleaned floors that protect crime scene evidence. I've organized files that solve cases. I've made coffee for officers who save lives. And for 12 years I was invisible, until Deputy Chief Langford arrived. Then suddenly I was visible, but only as a target. She described everything: the hour cuts, the disrespect, the systematic erasure of her worth as an employee and as a human being. She talked about watching other people get raises while she got pushed toward poverty, about staying silent because she had a daughter to support and couldn't risk losing her job entirely. But then something changed, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. I watched a dog refuse to stay quiet when a life needed saving. I watched a man who'd given everything to protect someone smaller and more vulnerable than himself. And I realized that staying silent doesn't keep you safe. It just makes you complicit in your own erasure. Langford's attorney stood. Objection. This is inflammatory and not relevant to. Overruled, Mrs. Holbrook said sharply. I want to hear this. Continue, Mrs. Richardson. Maya looked directly at Langford now. You targeted me because you thought I wouldn't fight back. You thought I was too small, too quiet, too afraid to matter, but you were wrong. I matter. Keisha matters. Thomas matters. Every person in this room who you tried to diminish matters. And today we're all barking, and you're going to listen. The room erupted in applause. Mrs. Holbrook didn't stop it. She just sat back, watching Langford's face crumble under the weight of accountability he'd never expected to face. When the hearing concluded 3 hours later, Mrs. Holbrook's decision was swift and unequivocal. Marcus Langford was terminated effective immediately, with cause. His pension was under review. A full audit of his personnel decisions would be conducted, with restitution for any employees who'd been financially harmed. This department stands for justice, Mrs. Holbrook said in her closing statement. When we fail to provide that justice to our own employees, we betray everything we claim to represent. Outside the building, Maya stood in the late afternoon sunshine, surrounded by people who'd become her allies and friends. Imani hugged her tight, tears streaming down both their faces. Bryant shook her hand with genuine respect. Even Chief Anderson had come, promising that changes were coming to protect employees from this kind of abuse in the future. But the moment that mattered most came when Amanda approached with Rex and hope. Daniel would have loved to see this, Amanda said softly. He always said you were stronger than you knew. Maya knelt down, and Rex immediately pressed his head against her chest. She wrapped her arms around him, and Hope squirmed closer, licking Maya's hand with her tiny pink tongue. Thank you, Maya whispered, for teaching me how to bark. Rex's tail thumped against the pavement, and in his eyes Maya saw understanding. They were kindred spirits now, bound by the same truth, that protecting what matters requires courage, that speaking up is its own form of love, and that miracles don't just happen. They're fought for, barked for, stood up for by those brave enough to refuse silence. The sun was setting over Pinewood, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. And for the first time in 12 years, Maya Richardson felt truly seen, not just by others but by herself. The quiet woman had found her voice, and the world had finally learned to listen. Part 8, Where Miracles Lead. 3 months after the hearing, Maya Richardson stood in front of a room full of police officers, city officials, and community members. Her hands were steadier now, though her heart still fluttered with nerves. The precinct's community room had been decorated simply: folded chairs in neat rows, a podium at the front, and beside it a framed photograph of Officer Daniel Granger with Rex at his side. Chief Anderson approached the podium first, adjusting the microphone. We're gathered here today for several reasons: to honor a hero, to celebrate a miracle, and to recognize someone who showed us all what courage really looks like. Maya glanced at Imani, who sat in the front row beaming with pride. Beside her sat Keisha, Thomas, Rodriguez, and a dozen other staff members whose lives had changed because someone finally refused to stay silent. And there, calm and dignified, sat Rex with Amanda, while Hope, now 3 months old and full of puppy energy, squirmed playfully at their feet. Chief Anderson continued, 3 months ago, a canine officer named Rex refused to let us ignore a miracle. His partner, Officer Granger, had protected a life with his last breath, but it took someone else's voice to help us truly hear what Rex was trying to say. Maya Richardson, would you please come forward? Maya stood, her legs feeling stronger than they had in years. As she walked to the podium, officers stood and began applauding. The sound filled the room, warm and genuine. Chief Anderson presented her with a plaque for 12 years of dedicated service and for demonstrating the courage to speak truth when silence would have been easier. The Pinewood Police Department officially recognizes Maya Richardson as Employee of the Year. Tears slipped down Maya's cheeks as she accepted the award, but that wasn't all. Additionally, the chief continued, we're creating a new position, Community Relations Coordinator. Someone to ensure that every voice in this department is heard, that every employee is treated with dignity, and that the kind of abuse Mrs. Richardson endured never happens again. Maya, if you're willing, we'd like that someone to be you. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. A real position, full-time with benefits, a salary that would let her breathe for the first time in years, that would let her help Imani finish college without working herself into exhaustion. Yes, she whispered, then stronger, yes, I accept. The room erupted in applause again, but this time Rex barked too, 3 clear, joyful barks that made everyone laugh through their tears. When the ceremony concluded, people lined up to congratulate Maya. But the moment that meant the most came when a young black officer approached, her eyes bright with emotion. Mrs. Richardson, I just graduated from the academy last month. When I heard about what you did, about how you stood up, it made me believe I could do this job, that I could be here and be heard. Thank you. Maya pulled the young woman into a hug, thinking about all the years she'd felt invisible, all the times she'd wondered if her life mattered at all. And now here was proof that speaking up hadn't just changed her life, it had rippled outward, giving courage to others who needed to see that standing up was possible. Later that evening, Maya sat on Amanda's back porch, watching Hope play in the grass with Rex supervising like the protective guardian he was. Amanda brought out 2 cups of tea, settling into the chair beside Maya. Daniel wrote something else in that letter, Amanda said quietly, something I didn't share at the funeral. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn from being read many times. He said, if Rex saves her, it won't just be about one puppy. It'll be about remembering that every life is worth fighting for, no matter how small or quiet or overlooked. It'll be about refusing to let the vulnerable be forgotten. Rex knows this, and whoever hears his barking will learn it too. Maya's throat tightened with emotion. He knew, didn't he, that it wasn't just about Hope. He always knew things like that. It's why he treated you with so much respect when others didn't notice you at all. Amanda reached over and squeezed Maya's hand. You didn't just speak up for yourself in that hearing. You spoke up for everyone who'd been silenced, just like Rex barked for Hope. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Pinewood. Rex settled at Maya's feet, and Hope climbed into her lap, already bonding with the woman who'd helped save her in a different way than Rex had, but no less important. Maya thought about the journey that had brought her here. The years of struggle, the moments of doubt, the fear that had almost kept her silent. And then the miracle, not just of Hope's survival, but of discovering that her own voice had power when she finally chose to use it. What happens now? Amanda asked softly. Maya smiled, scratching Hope behind the ears. Now I make sure other people know they can bark too, that their voices matter, that they don't have to stay invisible. As night fell over the small town, lights began flickering on in windows across the neighborhood. In one of those homes, Keisha was cooking dinner for her family, no longer afraid of being written up for standing up for herself. In another, Thomas was tucking his children into bed after finally getting the family time he deserved. Across town, Rodriguez was studying canine training manuals, preparing for the opportunity he'd been denied but had now been given. And in her own small house with the creaky porch, Maya Richardson sat at her kitchen table, looking at the plaque that bore her name. Employee of the Year, Community Relations Coordinator. But more than that, a woman who'd found her voice and used it to change not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Imani. "So proud of you, Mama. You're my hero." Maya smiled, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. She thought about Daniel, about Rex, about the funeral that had changed everything, about how one dog's refusal to stay quiet had sparked a chain reaction of courage that was still spreading. Miracles don't just happen in coffins, she realized. They happen every day when ordinary people decide to speak up, when the overlooked refuse to stay invisible, when those who have been silenced find the strength to bark. Outside, a dog barked in the distance, just a normal sound in a normal neighborhood. But to Maya, it sounded like hope, like possibility, like the promise that even the smallest voice, when raised at the right moment, can echo forever. She picked up her pen and began writing a speech for her first week in her new role. At the top of the page, she wrote, "Everyone deserves to be heard. Everyone matters. This is where that begins." Rex would have approved, Daniel would have been proud, and Maya Richardson, the humble woman who'd spent so many years cleaning floors and staying quiet, had finally learned the most important truth of all. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be silent. Sometimes the greatest miracle is simply having the courage to bark. And when you do, the whole world might just finally learn to listen. The end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Unbroken Gray Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.